Hey y'all, welcome back to the podcast. I'm your host, Vashti Sayre, and you are tuned in to another episode of All the Things where we literally talk about all the things. So in today's episode, we address reasons why Christians get divorced. Dana has been on the podcast before. She talked about stages of marriage. And in this episode, she unpacks these reasons why Christians get divorced, whether or not divorce is okay, and solutions outside of divorce that you can take in order to save your marriage, work on your marriage. But before we get into today's episode, let's talk about our sponsor for today. Our sponsor is Every Life diaper company that is pro-life. That mission and vision, my husband and I completely support. We also love that their diapers are fragrance-free and that our daughter loves them. She uses them every single day. They're leak proof, all the things you can possibly need in a diaper. So use my code VASHTI10, that is VASHTI10 for 10% off your first order. Now, let's get into today's episode. All right, we are back with Dana. She is no stranger to the podcast. The last time she was here, we talked about the stages of marriage. This week's episode, we'll be talking about the unexpected reasons Christians get divorced. So pretty hot topic, and I'm sure a lot of y'all will have your own comments and your own opinions on this. But Dana, she's an LPC, verified, a lot of experience. Let's just jump into it, Dana. But first, how are you doing?
I'm doing good.
Okay.
Good. I've had some people would call it alone time this week, but I'll call it solitude. I get to focus on what I want to focus on.
Did you get any tasks done? Like house tasks or big projects that you needed to get done?
Yeah, I've worked a lot in my yard and and I've gotten further in a book. Nice things like that.
My husband always says when he goes out for the day or like he has a meeting or something, he's like, whenever he comes back, I get all my to-dos done and all my tasks done. I'm like, yeah, because when you're here, I just want to be around you. I'm distracted or
exactly.
But, so reasons why Christians get divorced. Let's jump into it. From your experience, from your outlook, what are the unexpected reasons Christians get divorced that maybe a lot of us don't know about or we do know about?
Well, I think to me, it's because some aspect that you kind of knew about the other person kind of gets bigger.
Yeah.
When years and years kind of thing. And those things are, and I would say mental health is a big part of that. You don't realize some stressors that definitely happen as we get older. You kind of start seeing how someone's mental health does not make them able to handle those stressors. And so their mental health kind of gets worse versus better. And if they didn't think it was a big deal in the beginning, then their willingness to address it, treat it, look at it, and then you don't realize with that mental health, you can handle it maybe for yourself as a spouse, but then you add children and you don't start realizing, oh, wow. So this is what that mental health issue will do, in trying to bring up a child.
Yeah. Is there any way to pinpoint that beforehand, that mental health isn't one of the factors that triggers divorce? Or is it just one of those things where not until you're in the situation do you...
Yeah, that's sort of like another topic we kind of talked about, but I would say premaritally, it's totally okay to go to, like a group premarital thing or do a one-on-one with your pastor. Yeah. But I would say that people in pastoral positions are not as aware of, like, they can obviously address behaviors like this seems a little, but they don't know how to label that. That's a mental health problem that's not being addressed.
Right.
This could exacerbate.
So should Christians do both pastoral Christian counseling and I don't know if it's clinical counseling or secular counseling before they get married? Would that help?
I would say like with a licensed professional of some
Yeah.
sort.
Mhm.
Because that could be someone on a staff. They could be a licensed professional, so they could be more adept at that.
Yeah.
Um, but I would say too, like the thing that, maybe this is just my personal experience, but I see a lot of churches rely on lay counseling
Mhm.
as a way to help marriages,
Yeah.
and they do have quality people, leading lay counseling, or, like re-engaged. There's, all sorts of things that are very solidly based,
Yeah.
but they're really not adept at handling some more serious issues.
Yeah.
And so often, they may say something like, well, and I'm trying not to be sarcastic with this, but like, I would like for you guys to have a time to read your Bible together every week, or pray
Mm.
together, or something like that. And
Yeah.
that's not going to address the mental health issue. It's not going to
Mhm.
make that better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah.
the whole you can pray your anxiety away or your depression away. I mean, you could
Yeah.
prayer absolutely is important, but there are practical steps that you need to take in order to deal with depression and anxiety.
Yes. Yes.
Mm.
And I would say, like, we probably, as Christians, have been a lot more um, open to the idea that anxiety is a real thing, depression's a real thing. I would say that personality disorders are the
Oh,
are the ones that are a little more sneaky, uh,
okay.
because a lot of these personality disorders, when a person is in love, they're great people.
Yep.
When
Interesting.
things are going well, they're great
Mhm.
people. But when challenges come, or when your spouse becomes a real person versus a romantic expression of reality,
Yeah.
then that's where those personality disorders really raise their head. Mhm.
Yeah. Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
How do you deal with personality disorders? Or how do you even pinpoint that or identify that this person has a personality disorder and this is what's causing the rift
Yeah.
in the marriage?
I would say when you as a spouse have basically done all you can,
Mhm.
you've adjusted your attitude, you've been self-reflected on yourself and what you bring to the
Mhm.
situation. And then as you're doing those things, you're being a little more transparent about yourself to the other person. You're being a little more real with them about, like, I would say, in doing those sorts of things, of knowing yourself, knowing where your faults are,
Mhm.
knowing where they come from, addressing them, doing better at them, it actually makes you a stronger person to be able to then express to the other person,
Yeah.
it really bothers me that we get stuck on this, or the way that you respond to me whenever I've done my best to be kind to you. There's
Yeah.
still this, thing. And then that other person does not handle your honest, kind way of
Mhm.
talking to them. They manipulate, all those
Gaslight.
gaslight,
Yeah.
all those sorts of things,
Okay.
shut you out, all that kind of thing. Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
Wow. All right. Would you say mental health is one of the biggest unexpected reasons why Christians get divorced?
I would say it's a large one.
Okay.
Uh, I would also say um, addiction, that comes in all sorts of forms.
Okay.
So we normally think like alcohol and drug abuse when
Mhm.
we think about addiction, and but workaholic is an addiction,
Wow.
sexual addictions,
Yep.
you know. So, and those are the things that people are not honest about.
Even in counseling.
Yes,
Yep.
'cause that's kind of part of the addiction.
We hide these things.
Yeah, is to not be honest about how bad it is. I
Yeah.
always love, when
Okay.
I was younger, in my growing in my therapy, and there's this assessment that says, like how to ask people about whether or not they have alcohol as an issue. And
Yeah.
I naive, I was naive. Like I grew up in a household that um, total teetotalers. But my family's from South Louisiana, and we had iced tea and Coke at crawfish boils. So that's how, no alcohol period.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So for you have to ask a person like, how many drinks do you have in a day? But then you have to ask them, how big is the drink?
Yep.
Some people's glass of wine is, rah, it's
Yep.
huge, right? So, and they only have one drink.
Right.
So there's dishonesty a
Mm-hmm.
lot with addictions.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Other than addiction, so we have mental health, addictions. What else? What are these other things that triggers the
I would say the and sort of like I kind of look at it as like a Christian marriages specifically. There's a duality that's accepted.
Okay.
Men do what men do, and women do what women do.
Mm-hmm.
And so we create a life around that. And it could be as simple as, like I take care of the kids and he provides.
Okay.
Yeah. And then there's no longer kids.
Yeah.
Or there's no longer the provision that they used to have. Jobs change much more rapidly this day and age. Mm-hmm. And so then this agreed upon contract kind of
crumbles.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like that stages of marriage we talked about. It changes. The structure changes.
Mm-hmm.
And roles change. So
mm-hmm.
one of the husband can feel a lot more pressure because, well, we don't have, we're empty nesters now, but I'm still providing this much and I'm still having to do this much. Or, we do have kids now and I still have to cook, clean, and take care of the kids while all you're doing is providing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. And we have it's a new culture. And I don't mean what most of the time we Christians talking about the new crazy culture that we live in. I mean that we live longer, so you have a retirement at 65 and you live for 20 more years.
Mm-hmm.
And that dual role has disappeared, like he's not working, she doesn't have children, and you don't know really what to do.
Yeah.
Or that things are so dual nature that you've not created a relationship together.
Yeah.
And so you hit these markers where you start realizing, that you're not really, no longer are you one, you're two.
Wow. And any of these reasons why Christians get divorced split them up?
Yeah, they will. I just don't love this person anymore. I don't know who they are anymore. I feel like, it worked while he went to work, but now he's home. And I do realize what a jerk he is. Like he's really awful to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I could tolerate it as long as I was raising children and he was working.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
It reminds me, do you watch Gilmore Girls?
I never have.
Oh, okay. So in Gilmore Girls, I avidly watch it. It's one of the shows that I just keep in the background while I'm working.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
So Emily and Richard, they're married for many, many, many years, and Richard finally retires and he's at home. And when he's at home, Emily, his wife, realizes how annoying he is because he pays attention to every detail. And he's like, oh, I didn't know you did your hair today. Oh, I noticed yesterday that you put the candle here and today you moved it here. Oh, I noticed that today you drank 3 cups of coffee versus 1. And she just got annoyed, like, I need my space, like, get out, like, do your thing. And finally she asked her daughter, can you just distract your dad? He's annoying me ever since he's been here. But it goes back to that shift in season, and you don't realize, like, that person, but only for a certain chunk of the day. You see them in the mornings and in the evenings, but for the majority of the day, they're at work, they're doing their own thing, they're distracted, yada, yada, yada. But now they're home all the time, and it's like, wow, you get on my nerves. I don't really know you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
And it sort of goes to something that it's like an underlying thing I see sometimes is that thinking of the relationship of marriage as an exchange.
Yeah.
I work so that you can stay home,
Hmm.
or I do all this stuff for you. Like get the dry cleaning dealt with. I, you know, pay the lawn people. I do all these sorts of things, and you can go have a career,
Yep.
and then something stops that.
Mm-hmm.
Something, anything, lots of things can stop that, and
Yeah.
so then the exchange is no longer there.
Hmm. Wow.
Yeah.
What about infidelity?
I think that definitely happens. I
Mm-hmm.
am a person that doesn't put a big asterisk by infidelity. I think that there's in modern, world, there's more chances to have infidelity.
Yep.
Because you can have these online connections. Um, you can have a secret world, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I also think that there are ways to portray each other all the time
Yeah.
in a day to day. And it kind of goes back to like your original questions were like, how can you tell
Mm-hmm.
like early on,
Yeah.
and so there has to be like an acknowledgement of, to me, like that we are going to betray one another.
Mm.
We just are.
Yeah.
And some of it is, I was listening to a podcast this morning, and that we put such an emphasis on sex as a sin in America, when probably scripturally speaking, pride
Yep.
is a big one.
Yep.
And pride in marriages is huge because that's where you see people being contemptuous of another person, critical,
Mm-hmm.
because the underlying comment is, you suck and I don't.
Wow. Yep.
And kind of looking at, we often talk about communication as, that's what I hear a lot when people come to therapy as couples. We need to improve our communication. It's usually more about like, you don't know how to communicate, period, because what you want to communicate, nobody really wants to hear.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
No one really wants to hear how you think you're better than me.
Mm-hmm. You are pointing out the speck in someone else's eye when you got a big old plank in yours.
And then you complain that he just doesn't get you because, well, he doesn't want to get you because you're so critical,
Yeah.
or you're so selfish. The way
Yeah.
that you ask for sex is
Yeah.
so selfish. Or the way that you abstain from sex is so selfish.
Yeah. Huh. I never thought of, because it is true. I feel like we do put an emphasis on infidelity, the physical part of infidelity, and we don't realize there's a plethora of different things that causes a rift in marriage. And I mean, pride is one of those sins that leads to, well, I feel like pride leads to many other sins
Yes.
if it's not dealt with.
And the podcast I was listening to made such an excellent point about pride, because it said, and think about how the way to address your sin is to confess
Yep.
that you've sinned. And then if you have pride as a sin,
Yep.
how do you
Yep.
confess that you're prideful if you don't think you are?
Oh, wow. That's a doozy.
Isn't it?
Yep. Golly.
And I was like, guilty. I'm guilty of that.
Yep. Yep. Would you say Christian couples, Christian marriages struggle with infidelity as much as secular marriages? Or is it just as much, we just hide it a lot easier?
I mean,
or we don't
I haven't
broadcast
looked up
it?
a statistic on that, but I would say that it is possibly probably less than, because we have these little safeguards that we try to instill, which is don't try to create a relationship with a woman that is leaning toward where there's attraction beyond, beginning to build kind of thing. Don't, like a lot of don'ts in there, don't.
Yep.
Yeah. If you're going to, like my husband, travel with your work, like make yourself accountable, don't go places alone. Don't, set yourself up kind of thing. But in the same token, I would say that because sexual sins are so frowned upon, and they're the big reason why we allow divorce, back to that topic there, right? Then we will often hide those things probably more easily.
Wow. What about families?
Ooh. I think there's just a lot of I think that there's a lot of not paying attention to what it means for the two become one, for you to leave your mother and your father. I saw a funny Instagram on that the other day. I love this lady. Is just Smitty is her Instagram, but she's known for she calls Jesus all the time, like pretends to call him to ask a question. And so her question was, when you said to leave your mother and father when you get married, she said, you meant your mother and your father and your mother. Like that. And then Jesus supposedly says yes, and then she goes, will you please talk to my husband? It's for you. She goes, it's for you. And I in talking with like my family's from South Louisiana, and talking with my first cousins this past year, we were all talking about Southern mothers and their sons.
Oh, yes.
So, because
it's a thing.
We don't cook right. We don't do a lot of things right, kind of thing. And so there's, so you have to, like, are you as a child of your, being respectful to your parents, but at the same time, are you leaving that, creating, because the hard part to me is that people don't get that they hopefully will be living longer with their spouse than they ever did with their parents.
But that doesn't mean you neglect your parents.
No, but it also means you do not allow your parents to take time and energy from you that belongs to your spouse.
Yeah. But how do you clearly define or make time for them without taking too much time from your spouse? Because I think that's a common issue, especially in the South. I have a couple of friends who, you know, express that, especially with if it's their son, mommies and their son, that's a big one. And not being able to have that hard fast boundary, or it's, well, they're not going to live that long, and always having mom around, or how do you navigate that as a wife?
I think that if you find yourself um, having to always negotiate the parents and what they're asking you to do
Mm-hmm.
as superseding what your marriage needs.
Okay.
So what I this is one of the common ones is like, well, for Easter we're with the family. For Thanksgiving we are with somebody's family. For Christmas we're with somebody's family. The family, you know, we're doing exactly what my mom and dad did for Christmas. We do exactly the way that they did it.
Wow.
I can't tell my mom no, that we're not going to let them be at the house at 7 a.m. when the kids come downstairs
Yeah.
to open the presents. You know, they
Yeah.
don't have to be there for every moment.
But they don't have that much longer to live.
I don't know what that has to do with anything, honestly.
Okay. And I appreciate that, because I think too often we make excuses, and this is the trap that I feel like a lot of women are in. At least what they vocalize, my friends have vocalized, is, well, they don't have that much longer to live, so that's why I'm compromising. But on the other end, are the wives being a little bit too controlling and critical and possessive over their spouse? Could that be an
Oh, sure. And so if you are feeling that, if you're feeling that your wife is not being kind
Mm-hmm.
um, with what she's asking for with the relationship with the parents,
Yeah.
if your wife is being controlling, and that she can't handle somebody else's way of doing things, she's
Yeah.
not open to that. If she is picking to do things like, well, no, we can't go see your parents, but yet at the same time she's seeing hers
Mm.
3 times as much as you're getting to see yours. Well, then yeah,
Yep.
you have something to say there. Yeah. But that's coming from a whole different perspective. That's
Yeah.
someone not seeing the speck in their eye.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So how do you mitigate that?
You have to
How do
have really,
you
yeah, like,
come to a happy?
well, you first and foremost have to figure out why it bothers you.
Mm.
Because what I hear a lot is it's like a tally system, back to the exchange thing.
Ah.
Okay. We
Mm-hmm.
went to your parents last week,
So now,
and so now we have to go to my
oh, we have to
parents.
go to mine.
Or we get Easter Sunday and they can have Christmas Day, and you're negotiating with your parents. Like it's
Mm.
like they're part of the negotiation.
Huh. Like they're a part of the marriage when they're
Yeah.
not.
Yeah.
Okay. I've never ever viewed it that way before, but you've opened my eyes,
Yeah.
because the marriage comes first.
Yeah.
Interesting.
If it weren't for the marriage, there wouldn't be the grandkids.
Right. Huh.
There wouldn't be a house that they're proud that you live in. There
Yeah.
wouldn't be, you know,
Yeah. And what about children?
I mean, I think that's a cultural issue a
Mm.
lot this day and age, of letting children take over your marriage.
Okay.
And I'm not a I mean, back when my children were young, there was this push in the church of, you know, mommy and daddy are talking, or mommy and daddy are this, and you need to go over there and be quiet. I'm not talking about that, but I'm talking about making room for your marriage while you have children, making room for your kids to see that you're still married in the midst of being parents, that sort of thing. I mean, this may gross people out, but like when my daughter was leaving, kind of thing, my husband and I were joking to her in the sense of, we weren't literally trying to make her feel like that's what we were going to do to her, but was, oh wow, you're no longer sleeping in that room anymore, so that bed's available to us as well. And I we occupy that room. I'm not stuck in the master bedroom anymore, but it was more like a gentle way of saying, mom and dad's life will go on.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And it's already been going on.
Yeah.
It's just now there's going to be, we've been respectful of you.
Yeah, absolutely.
We've allowed that to be your room. Yeah. But if you're not here, it's not really your room.
We're using it.
Yeah.
That's great. And it shows her that, even as far as y'all are in marriage, we still love each other.
Yeah.
We still know how to joke around, be around each other. We want each other. And I think that's important.
Yeah. Because I've with a lot of couples, I will ask, especially when I do sex therapy, one of my intake questions is, how were your parents affectionate to one another? And I often get, they weren't in front of us.
Wow. I see that a lot. At least I hear that a lot from friends and older individuals where, I've never seen my mom and dad hold their hands, or I've never seen them kiss each other. And then they're married 20, 30 years and they don't hold hands anymore. They don't kiss each other, et cetera, et cetera.
And as we're talking, and I'm just thinking about some things, the relationship between the two of you is what keeps your marriage going.
Right.
And so if you lose relationship because you allow the kids to be your relationship, then you do put your marriage at risk.
Yep.
If your relationship becomes with your coworkers, that's the place where your life is stimulated, and that's the place where you are able to talk and be heard. Then you're running a risk with your relationship.
Yeah.
If you are allowing, like if you're making intimacy too hard, and if you're making it too hard to be known with each other, then an online relationship becomes easier. That's why people do porn.
Yep.
It's easy. You just press a button and there it is.
Yep. Wow. One of my family members told me about 5 years ago, they don't know who they are. And they said that when they became empty nesters. I don't know who I am. I don't even know my husband. And her advice was, don't let your children become your idol, because you'll be in the position where I'm at, where I don't know who I am. I don't know what my purpose is. My kids are my purpose for the past 20 years. And now here we are. I'm looking at a man that I don't even know.
Yeah. And that starts premaritally on. My parents were divorced when I was 12, and my mom just passed away in December.
Yeah.
And so I was a very bothersome daughter to her in her last years, because I took all this caretaking time as an opportunity to ask like these really big questions
All the
that
questions. Yeah.
I not because she was sitting still and not trying to clean my kitchen when she was visiting. Because she'd love to do acts of service.
That's my mom too.
A nice way of saying it. So I didn't really and so I asked her, like, what was your theory when you got married? What to my dad? Like, what was the reasoning behind it? Like, what prompted you? And she said she just really wanted a home and children. And I was like, and then there's actual people that live there with you when you get a home and a children and a husband and those sorts of things. And so, and then she even said, like, she goes, and even knowing what I know now about your father, she said, I still would have done it because I was so wanting a home and children. And I just think about that. Like, are you allowing yourself to be known to yourself?
Yeah. So why should you get married? Well, when someone chooses marriage, why?
So funny.
Because they shouldn't get married for sex. You should get married because,
I hear you. So my rule when I became an adult, when I was in college, is I was not going to get married before I was 25. That didn't happen. I was going to go to grad school right after my undergrad. That didn't happen. I had all these things, right? So, and I was a confident, cute, serious. I had lots of things going for me. I felt pretty good at my thoughts about this stuff, right? Yeah. I wasn't sad about those decisions in any way. And I randomly met my husband. It's a longer story. But this past weekend, and digging through a bunch of old stuff, part of our story is that we only got to see each other 10 times in the flesh before we got married, because he was in the military and he would be, I met him. He was around for a couple months. Then he got deployed for 6 months. Then he was back for 6 months. We did not live in the same state when he was even back in the States. And then he got deployed to another country. So it's like for 6 months. And then when he came back, he got moved to a different state than the state I was in. So we were never together.
Yeah.
So we wrote letters during that 1 6-month period, and we still have the letters,
Yeah.
And what I learned is that, and just going back and watching my 21 and 22-year-old self express myself to this person. And I was sharing this with a friend, and she's like, and Dana, it wasn't like this 4-dimensional thing where you could like talk and talk and talk, and then he would sit there and sigh or respond. Like you didn't even get to see the response. And so I just was looking over it, and what I found was that I found a person I could be myself with. And it makes me so much think of the high priestly prayer in John 17, that I felt like how Jesus talks about it, God in him, Jesus in me through the Holy Spirit. Like, I felt my whole self was known, and he felt the same, So I didn't have this fear of, well, if he knew this about me, he may not want me.
Yeah.
Or I have to keep this up so I can get a house and kids. I have to ignore what I am noticing about him because I have to get my house and kids.
Yeah.
you know?
So not marrying for selfish reasons.
Yes.
Okay. That's hard because I feel like a lot of us have some selfish, not trigger, but some selfish motive
Mm-hmm.
behind marriage. It's just to get away from my parents,
Mm-hmm.
to prove a point, to satisfy physical needs,
Mm-hmm.
for financial stability.
To have someone to come to all these other weddings with me so I don't sit by myself.
Yes. Yes, I've heard people, in relationships, not marriage, but in relationships, now I finally have someone to go to weddings with. Okay. There's a lot to that though.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So, what are alternatives to getting divorced?
So I love this question because first of all, I think I get concerned with, like I see it a lot as a counselor of couples is that people come to me when I'm like, they can't fix it,
Yeah.
is their thought process. And now, oh goody, we've tried everything. And like I don't know how people like that. That can maybe be an ego boost for some people, but it's very daunting. Yeah.
I tried everything.
Yeah. And I can also see why people don't become couples counselors because they got
There's
two
a lot of
people.
pressure on that.
Yeah. Two people to talk to. And I got a marriage to save that there's children involved and all this sort of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, so I think coming to some kind of counseling, a third person, a person who's supposed to be unbiased, who's willing to be honest with you,
Mm-hmm.
so doing that early, like
Mm-hmm.
when you find yourself struggling on some point that it keeps being the same argument,
Yeah. You're
you
just in
know.
a cycle.
Mhm. Yeah. So I
Okay.
think that's a good way to prevent divorce.
Mm-hmm.
I also think a good way to prevent divorce is to try to stay friends so that everything waxes and wanes. We've talked about sex can change. You go through, like we talked about, you go through these times where there's this bit of a drift, you know. So you need to
Yeah.
be able to keep a friendship that kind of can withstand not getting to, like people always, you see it on Instagram. I love a friend that if you don't talk to her for 3 years, you can just come back and you pick up where you left off. You know?
Mhm. Yep.
So maybe that in a spouse,
But how do you
maybe.
do that if you're on the brink of divorce? How do you do that? How do you
Well, I think that's how you prevent getting yourself on the brink of divorce,
Okay.
is
Okay.
to say, like, hey, like, we still got this going for us.
Yep.
And if at least if it feels like we've lost the other things, you're a trustworthy person to me that if we lose, like we've lost sex, we've lost intimacy, your depression or your personality disorder, like at least I can trust that you care to do something about it,
Yeah.
because I have this friendship with you where I have
Yeah.
trusted you, you know. Yeah. And I even said that about my husband. I didn't think he was perfect when I married him, but I thought if I said this is a problem and it was true,
Mm-hmm.
he would go do something about it.
Mm-hmm.
I could trust him to
Yep.
do something about it.
You know he has your back. You know he'll be there for you.
I know that he would believe me
Yep. Yeah.
because he trusts me too.
Yeah.
He would trust that if I was serious enough to sit down and say this, because I don't run my mouth about every little thing
Mm-hmm.
and nitpicking to death, So if I come to you with a complaint, it's serious and
Yep.
it's true for me.
Yep. I think that's a good point. As women, we tend to nitpick and criticize every little thing.
Every little thing.
More than men, I feel like.
Mm-hmm.
At least that's my observation. And my dad told me this before I got married. He said, Vashti, pick and choose your battles. No man likes to be told a list of things that they're doing wrong.
No.
He's like, no man likes it.
No.
All right.
And especially in a like the same tone that you talk to your children.
Yep. Like you're scolding them or you're treating them like a child.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a good point.
Not as a peer.
Yeah.
So I would say that.
Mm-hmm.
I would say too that if you are thinking that you're going to get divorced, there's a couple of things that you can do.
Mm-hmm.
They are there are things that I didn't realize that I was doing some of this stuff in my therapy. I was like, oh, I didn't know there was a name for that, kind of thing. But some of it is that you have to find someone who's willing to do certain types of therapy that just isn't about you getting like better communication or listening to what the complaints are. And really, honestly, and I've heard this, like where they just fix the thing, like, oh, this person is selfish and he doesn't call a lot. He doesn't tell you where he is. And he's betrayed you before years ago. So let's come up with a system that helps you feel more safe.
Right.
Okay. I don't tend to do that in therapy. That to me, making you feel more safe, that's an individual therapy session. And that's not a couple session.
Okay.
If you can't, you have to accept of where your marriage is.
Mm-hmm.
You can't, and then you have said what you need to say to that person and they're not doing anything, then it's sort of like an individual session of like, what do you do with yourself?
Okay.
Like, what are you going to do with yourself kind of thing. And so I would say, especially in cases where someone doesn't want to do couples counseling, like the other person doesn't want to do it, they don't believe in it. I think a lot of Christians think that if they go to couples counseling, they're going to get divorced. And I start thinking to myself, well, maybe that's because the people that end up going to couples counseling are so close to divorce that, I mean, like you got to watch the statistics, right? Or these, case studies that you're doing with your friends. Well, they went to marriage counseling, and they got divorced. Okay.
So,
yeah, because you don't know how he treats her behind closed doors, kind of thing. Yep. So discernment counseling is a term for meeting with a therapist for sort of like a one-time kind of thing. And it's giving it like 2 hours, a 2-hour session where you kind of cover all the things. And then the therapist helps you to discern, because we as therapists don't decide, you discern what to do.
Okay.
Yeah. It's a good and in those cases, like it's, one of the things I often say is that, like we use the word submit a lot in Christian lingo, and I don't think you should submit to sin. If someone's sinning against you in a way that is painful and harmful to your own well-being, there's no need to stay in the same household with that person.
So should divorce be the first thing on the board, or is there another
there's also what I've just started this year, but it's called therapeutic separation. And so what it is
Okay.
you agree to separate. In the state that I live in, Texas, there's no legal separation. So, um, yeah, you can maybe go write up a contract or something, but it's not really, it's only recognized from a kind of a business sense, not
Yeah.
from a marriage, uh, judicial sense.
Yeah.
And so in Texas, there's only divorce or stay married. That's
Yeah.
legally your choices. And so a therapeutic separation is a very step by step way of being separated. And it has to be therapeutics, meaning that each of you should be doing certain things while the separation is happening.
Okay.
So it's frequently used in addiction situations. And so there may be something like where someone has been abusing the finances because of their addiction. So there may be something like a separation of accounts, a separation of households because this person's addiction is affecting the well-being of the household and the children. I also think it's important. I think a therapeutic separation is a good thing where you cannot stop arguing. Like you go home to do the counselor homework and all it does is it just ends up in another fight.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I see that as, and so and in the therapeutic situation of separation is that you would have these agreed upon times that you're going to meet again,
Okay.
So it may be every 7 days you have to do a therapy appointment, to go over what did you do individually kind of thing. But it is being in a separate household to do so.
Yeah.
To go through it.
I spoke to her name is Ellie. She spoke last week or this week on a pornography addiction that her husband had, and she did do therapeutic separation. I don't know if that's the term that was used when she did it 5 years ago or more, but she went and moved in with her parents, and he lived in the house, I guess, that they had together as a married couple. But after doing that for a year, I think they met up once a week, but after they did that for a year, he still didn't break his addiction to pornography, and it ended in divorce. But how long what's the timeline for therapeutic separation? Is it just dependent on the other individual who's willing to wait and work on the marriage, or is it you give it a specific timeline?
To me, I think two things happen. One is the person that I don't tend to like, we call it the identified problem. Okay. So it's very difficult in couples counseling not to create one of them as the identified problem. And we're supposed to work in counseling couples not to create the identified problem.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. Because both people play a role.
Absolutely.
Okay. How you respond to the problem is important too. Okay.
Yeah.
So kind of the person with the identified problem. Okay. If just like you described, if they do not fulfill like what are some of these bottom lines for the other person to feel safe, secure, emotionally safe, physically safe. Okay. If those things are not happening, then to me that's, and you can just, and it's up to the person who's being, offended here to say, I've given you X amount of times, and I'm not going to call them chances, times.
Yeah.
And I've given you this, and that's what I like about it, is it gives you this set amount of time instead of this, I promise I'll, so I've allowed you to try these X amount of times. and I'm not willing to do that anymore. And so it's up to that other person to say, I'm done, you know,
Yeah.
or you start seeing that this one of these people was already separated.
Right.
This is just, you know, like I am just looking like I tried.
Yep.
And when you start sensing that, then it's okay for the other person. Like I would as a therapist say, it looks like you're just phoning this in and biding your time.
Mm-hmm.
I just call it.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
It sounds like you're just ready to leave. And so
Yeah.
let's take the Band-Aid off
Yeah.
and do what you're going to do.
There's a lot of comments made about divorce. And you
Mhm.
mentioned if you don't, God's not going to allow you to submit to sin.
Mhm.
But the Bible, when it comes to divorce, God allows it on the grounds of infidelity or
Mhm.
adultery. But
Mhm.
we talk about unwillingness to treat mental health. We talked about failure to acknowledge, roles in the household, blended families, children becoming your idol. These aren't biblically what has been outlined grounds for divorce.
Yes.
How do you, I don't want to say justify, but how do you,
Reconcile that with
I guess,
scripture.
reconcile with scripture?
Well, for one thing, I think we have to take into account that in the time that um, all these scriptures were written, a
Mm-hmm.
woman would not be able to ask for a divorce, period,
Yep.
whether you were secular or not.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. We had no rights. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not addressed. And I think another thing too is that what when Jesus was sort of speaking about the fact that there was not another reason, that adultery was the reason,
Yeah.
the lonely reason, he was making that in reference to the Pharisees questioning him, like, what do you have to say about it?
Right.
Right? Because Moses had allowed them to get divorced.
Mm-hmm.
And so to me, he was separating out, like, you can't do the willy-nilly divorce that we used to allow.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we used to allow in Moses' time, we were allowing people to be divorced because we didn't like her attitude.
Mm-hmm.
you know
Yeah.
and she got too big and too fat, and
Yeah.
she got all these sorts of things, kind of thing. So to me, he was stating that it can't be a willy-nilly thing. It has to be something
Yeah.
where there has been a breaking of the promise between two people.
Okay.
Yeah. And so to me, back to this idea of betrayal, okay,
Mm-hmm.
it's adulterous in a sense
Mm-hmm.
to not in the, if you take that, that adultery is not just a physical giving of yourself,
Yep.
you know? So there's many other ways that
Like you said,
you,
you can put work.
yeah.
Yeah, you can be adulterous with your work, your time,
Mm-hmm.
your
Yeah.
finances. Okay.
And I see that, like, I'm kind of thinking of a person that I've known that, her spouse is so, don't like, he uses work to avoid the intimacy of his marriage.
Mm.
It comes in with all the, I'm too tired from a long week.
Yeah.
I can't spend one-on-one time with you.
Yeah. But I think there's an underlying issue there.
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So again, I think um, we have to culturally, we always are asked to look at scripture within the context
Mm-hmm.
of what it was written.
Yep.
And then I think additionally, it goes to the church's problem with, I think, using marriage as a gauge of how healthy we are as Christians.
Wow. Wow. Yeah. And they put a lot of pressure there.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm. Well, I think we're running out of time here, but as
Yeah.
we're wrapping this up, if there are 3 things you would want someone to walk away with, what would those 3 things be?
Well, number one, work on your relationship.
Okay.
Remember why you got connected to this person.
Mm-hmm.
Keep that going if it was a healthy, good reason. Yeah. And keep that going. Keep room for it. Keep space for it.
Yeah.
And then secondly, know yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Don't enter into conflict and disagreements without knowing yourself and where you're
Mm-hmm.
coming from, and having enough time with God to ask him, why do I want to quarrel about this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What need do I have that's wanting me to quarrel?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then thirdly, don't get hung up on just the physical.
Okay.
Mentioned it before.
Yep.
We are physical, spiritual, and emotional.
Yep.
And we need to involve all those things
Yeah.
in all aspects of our world.
Yep. That's good. That's really good.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you so much, Dana. It's
You're
a
welcome.
pleasure. I've learned so much, and I know other people will learn a lot from this. There's a lot to take away. And in what we talked about, there's so much more to unpack.
Yeah.
I think we just skimmed the surface of a lot of the reasons why Christians get divorced, and even alternatives to divorce, and just the topic of whether divorce is right or wrong. And coinciding that with scripture, there's a lot to unpack, but thank
You're
you.
welcome.
I greatly
You're
appreciate it, and I hope you have a good day.
Me too.